Sam Giancana was the most flamboyant gangster of them all, when organized crime was at its most extravagant.
I'd say he was far more powerful than Al Capone, and he was a giant.
He had a beautiful showbiz girlfriend. He was pals with Frank Sinatra.
Sam Giancana didn't like to keep a low profile. He liked the big life. He liked to be seen with the stars.
He was worth millions and had the power of life or death.
He killed a lot of people, had a lot of people killed.
One cold stare from you and it could cause you to become very concerned.
If you crossed him, you were in deep trouble.
But in helping elect a clean young president and assisting in the CIA's murkiest operations, his career sees the mafia and politics mix into a deadly cocktail. The pursuit of Sam Giancana is the ultimate story of the state versus the mob. And the final chapter is one of the most notorious mafia hits of all. Sam Giancana had learned his gangster trade from Al Capone's top enforcers. He excelled as a driver, delivering killers to murder their victims and evade the cops. He learned how to lend money and collect the interest.
Hey, Sam, loan me a $5. I got to go get something. He said, what do you take for security? And Sam said, how about a lie?
His furious outbursts were so savage that people around him wondered about his mental stability.
He was violent. But the people in the Chicago outfit almost are all violent. They kill people with the drop of a hat.
He was a killer. Aged just 18, Giancana was charged with murder, but escaped conviction.
When I first saw Sam Giancana, I thought, there is the arrogance, the hatred, the violence, the viciousness that I've dedicated my career to fighting.
For the mob, Giancana's greatest strength was not his violent nature, but his gift for making money. It was Giancana who struck fear into the electricians' union so that every slot machine in Chicago paid the mob. It was Giancana who muscled the black gambling kings out of Chicago with threats and murder. Under his watchful eye, millions of dollars poured in from casinos in Las Vegas and Cuba. And by 1957, aged 49, Sam Mooney Giancana was boss of the Chicago outfit.
Sam Giancana was the most powerful criminal chief in the history of the United States. He had his tentacles into the police, to the courts, to the business world around Chicago.
But just as Giancana reached the top, the government turned on organized crime. An eager young lawyer began fighting to see him and his kind fall. Robert Kennedy.
The nation's underworld gets the unwelcome spotlight of publicity as the Senate's Investigations Subcommittee begins new hearings on crime. Arkansas Senator McClellan...
The Senate Labor Rackets Committee was investigating mafia corruption of the trade unions. Robert Kennedy, as chief legal counsel, made a name for himself by questioning witness after witness about their mob connections.
Did you say that SOB, I'll break his back? Who did you make it about?
I don't know. I may have been discussing somebody in a figure of speech.
Well, who did you make the statement? Whose back were you going to break?
I don't even remember it.
Well, whose back were you going to break, Mr. Hoffa?
Figure of speech, I don't even know who I was talking about, and I don't know what you're talking about.
I mean, it was real-life drama, and it was exciting to watch.
On the 9th of June, 1959, The witness was Sam Giancana.
You tell us whether if you have opposition from anybody that you dispose of them by having them stuffed in a trunk. Is that what you do, Mr. Giancana? Would you tell us...
Giancana refused to answer Kennedy's questions by taking what is known in America as the Fifth Amendment.
When you take the Fifth, you say essentially, I respectfully decline to answer on the grounds that my answer might tend to incriminate me, and nobody can touch you for it.
Sam Giancana asserted his Fifth Amendment rights over 30 times.
I declined to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate me.
Chief Counsel Robert Kennedy seemed frustrated and goaded the gangster.
Will you tell us anything about any of your operations, or you just giggle every time I ask you a question?
I declined to answer because I honestly believe my answer might tend to incriminate me.
I thought only little girls giggled, Mr. Giancana.
Bobby Kennedy's theatrics were perhaps intended to light Giancana's famously short fuse.
I think he was hoping that Giancana would explode. But, you know, I never thought he really gave a damn.
Round one in this long, bitter feud went to Sam Giancana. Kennedy could get nothing on him. And there was a reason why the Chicago boss felt untouchable. He was well connected to the Kennedys. Robert Kennedy's big brother, Senator John F. Kennedy, had set his sights on the White House. But just to become the Democrat presidential candidate was a battle. A Boston Irish Catholic couldn't get elected to anything in staunchly Protestant states of 60s America like Wisconsin and West Virginia. The wealthy Kennedy clan would have to buy support in these key primary elections, so they reached out to an influential family friend for help. Frank Sinatra.
Sinatra was a friend of the Kennedy family, and Jack Kennedy in particular.
Frank, in his turn, had a friend and business partner who knew all about getting his way in politics. Sam Giancana.
I have every reason to believe that there was mob money in the West Virginia election. The person who handled the money was Frank Sinatra.
Before voters went to the polls, Giancana sent one of his men to spread $50,000 around West Virginia. He sweetened local politicians with new office furniture and paid bar owners to keep Sinatra's campaign song, High Hopes, playing on jukeboxes across the state. Giancana's efforts seemed to help get the Kennedys over the first hurdle. John F. Kennedy became the Democrat candidate to run for president. But an even bigger challenge lay ahead. In November 1960, John Kennedy faced the sitting Vice President, Richard Nixon, in the race for the White House. The election was too close to call. Pundits were saying that whoever won the state of Illinois would win the presidency. And the key to Illinois was Sam Giancana's backyard, Chicago. Giancana's Chicago outfit knew all about how to swing votes in their city. They'd been doing it for generations.
In this city, no criminal enterprise is going to work until they've got the politicians in their pocket. He had the politicians, and I mean all of them.
One ruse was to send scores of people from precinct to precinct, illegally voting in each one. Another well-worn trick was ghost voting, impersonating deceased residents of a precinct. Mob-controlled unions were prevailed upon to vote Kennedy to a man. There were even claims that Giancana's hoods intimidated voters at the polling stations.
Listening to the radio, listening to the returns coming in, it was obvious that there was a theft underway.
Not since 1916 had the presidential election result been so close. Kennedy beat Nixon by just 0.1%.
Somewhat afternoon on the day after the election, Senator Kennedy received a telegram from the vice president congratulating him on his victory. With this in his pocket,
Sam Giancana was quick to claim that it was he who had elected Kennedy to the White House. While most dispute this, Giancana certainly expected payback.
Giancana can legitimately think that he had done his work and that he had tipped it and that he could expect some result.
Giancana expected the new Kennedy administration to get Bobby off his back. He told an associate,
"Bobby will just be another goddamn lawyer soon. They promised me they'll take care of him."
I am, in my mind, convinced that there was a deal cut. That if Giancana would get Illinois for the Democrats, that he would be given free hand.
Giancana prophesied to the outfit a lessening of government harassment in Chicago and Las Vegas. He couldn't have been more mistaken. New President John F. Kennedy appointed his brother, Bobby, to the government post of Attorney General.
I have felt that we should secure the best talent we could get for every position, regardless of party, regardless of any other factor. This test has been applied, and it's been applied in this case.
Far from being just another lawyer, as Attorney General, the fanatical mob-chasing Robert Kennedy was now the country's top law enforcement officer. It was a shock for Giancana and the Chicago outfit.
The last thing they thought was they would get Robert Kennedy as the Attorney General. Anybody but Robert Kennedy. That was a surprise.
Bobby Kennedy, now in charge of the Department of Justice and the FBI, declared war on the Mafia.
I think that in the field of organized crime, I think it's a very serious situation that's facing the country at the present time. I think a lot of steps can be taken in order to deal with the problem. I think it's gotten much more serious over the period of the last 10 years.
Giancana cursed at the sight of the Attorney General and fumed at the very mention of the Kennedy name. To him, Bobby Kennedy's war on organized crime was a betrayal. But as the Justice Department went to war, Sam Giancana fell in love. Phyllis McGuire was the lead singer of the headlining trio, the McGuire Sisters. She was 29. Giancana was 52. It seems violent Mo Giancana could be charming.
And he wasn't flashy. It was just direct, and it was strength, and his eyes were, it's like they looked through you.
She was a big star, stunningly beautiful, and he loved to be seen out with her on his arm. Giancana began to flood her with gifts of furs, cars, and jewelry. Cash had always bought him the most beautiful escorts, but this was different. He began to neglect business in Chicago to follow Phyllis to performances all over the US. He even accompanied her on a 2-week European tour. The tough mob boss had a chink in his armor, a weak spot the government would later use to help bring him down. While Giancana was romancing Phyllis, Attorney General Bobby Kennedy was hard at work radically reforming the Department of Justice and the FBI.
He was extremely driven. He absolutely hated what he called the outfit, the Mafia, organized crime.
To the 10 FBI agents assigned to Chicago, Kennedy added 60 more. Giancana called them G-men, or just the G. At first he was unconcerned, dismissing them as Boy Scouts. Up to now, their track record against organized crime had not been good. But Kennedy was changing the game. The FBI agents that descended on Giancana were a new breed. They were all clean-cut, college-educated men. Many were lawyers. Above all, the biggest problem for Sam Giancana was that these government men had a fanatical commitment to their incorruptibility. Unlike other Chicago law enforcement, Giancana couldn't buy them. Robert Kennedy was also increasing the number of lawyers in the Justice Department's Organized Crime and Racketeering section from 17 to 63. He rebuilt the whole operation.
You can think of the Department of Justice as an aircraft carrier, and you can't turn an aircraft carrier on a dime. They don't have brakes. You can slow it down and steer it. He turned it on a dime and took it in a different direction.
The Attorney General funded his new crack team of investigators well. His goal was to get all government agencies working together as never before, to break the grip of organized crime.
He talked directly to you. It gave us a whole feeling of electricity in what we were doing and commitment to what we were doing.
We did feel that we were kind of like the new untouchables.
Giancana was now closely watched by the new FBI agents in Chicago.
The view is fine and the kids are still in school. Over.
His HQ was in the back of the Armory Lounge Bar and Restaurant in Chicago's Forest Park suburb. Despite FBI surveillance, his private business remained secret behind closed doors.
Eyeball one to dugout.
I read you loud and clear.
Or so he thought.
10-3, eyeball one. Stay with it.
The G-men had a new weapon that would turn Giancana's world upside down. Electronic surveillance.
Bobby Kennedy decided that organized crime was an issue of national security. It was a threat to the United States and fell in that category that you could exercise a wiretap and install a wiretap without a warrant.
The number of FBI bugs and wiretaps in America exploded from just a handful to hundreds. The FBI agents Romer and Hill, assigned to monitor Giancana, were quick to hide a microphone in the Holy of Holies, his HQ, the Armory Lounge. The G-men overheard Potsy Poe, an old associate, complaining about them to Mooney Giancana.
I never thought it'd be this. You told me when they put his brother in there, we're going to see some fireworks. Well, I never knew it would be like this. This is murder. Concentrate on a certain individual. You mean the outfit? Yeah.
The agents heard exactly how Giancana ran the outfit. Although officially the boss, he received advice from senior mob figures and retired boss Tony Accardo.
Listen, Mo. Oh, we aren't here to try to twist your mind. We're just giving you what's practical. Practical advice, that's all. We're not here to try to distort you.
The tapes also revealed how Giancana advised his driver and bodyguard, Butch Blasi, about the Mafia Code of Silence, Omerta. He warned about the penalties for blabbing mob business to outsiders.
There was a stuffed fish over the bar, and he points up to the stuffed fish. and says,
"You know how that fish got that way? He opened his mouth."
and of course he's saying this into a bug himself, but he's telling Butch Blasey to don't talk about all that kind of stuff.
FBI agents Roma and Hill, in their surveillance of Giancana, did their utmost to exploit his weak spot, the relationship with Phyllis McGuire. They watched Sam and Phyllis closely, very closely. They took photos and shot moving footage of them together when they went out. With wiretaps and bugs, they also listened when they stayed in, even recording their conversation in their bedrooms. Whether in Las Vegas, or Maryland, Pittsburgh, or Atlantic City. The pressure of tight surveillance got to Sam Giancana. His acid anger was fired at the G-men whenever he saw them.
Now Roman, he spots us. He says, "Hello, Mo," and he walks away. So we move out of there into the other room and walks in but that Hill.
Giancana started to lose control. He antagonized the agents and hissed obscenities. Retired boss Accardo was concerned that Giancana would do something stupid.
Don't call them dirty words or anything. Don't pay attention. Just walk away from them. Let them talk. You guys, holler and go themselves and this and that. They're bastards. They're just like us. They got a job to do. We know what to do and we do it. I know.
Bobby Kennedy was tightening the noose. But one government agency had jeopardized all his work by secretly seeking Giancana's help, the CIA. The consequences for the agency and for Giancana would eventually be dire. Giancana and many other gangsters had once had vast, lucrative business interests on the island of Cuba, just a short hop from Miami. In exotic and poverty-stricken Cuba, white tourists with green dollars could live like royalty and lose money in the comfort of the mob-owned casino hotels.
Cuba was a gold mine for the mob. There's a lot of money made down there in the casinos and the joints, and Castro took it away completely.
On New Year's Day, 1959, Fidel Castro's rebel forces swept into Havana and, with popular support, supplanted the old mob-friendly regime of President Batista. Castro swiftly nationalized land and American businesses. He cost the mob and the US government untold millions of dollars.
The mob, they were running Cuba. They were running amok down there under Batista. And when Castro came in, he threw them all out. So they were not happy with him. If they could get rid of Castro, they could move back in.
It wasn't just the mob who wanted Castro gone. The CIA saw Castro as a dangerous communist on America's doorstep, and they wanted him swept away.
So who would you go to? You go to mob guys who had good connections in Cuba. They'd operated there for years and are pretty good at killing people.
On the basis that my enemy's enemy is my friend, the CIA met Giancana and associates to try to arrange a gangland hit on Cuba's president, Fidel Castro.
They're certainly naive about the organized crime. They're not a hit squad. You can't buy them to kill people. They thought they could.
At a clandestine meeting at the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, the CIA wanted a Capone-style attack. with Castro going down in public in a hail of bullets. The real-life gangsters demurred, wanting to keep things nice and clean. Giancana suggested something much more CIA, using pills to poison Castro's food and drink. The CIA took his advice. But when a US government agency secretly commissioned murder from gangsters, they should have seen trouble coming.
And once you've dealt with them and they've given you something, then they have a right to ask for something back. And you don't want a reciprocal relationship with them. You're compromised.
Master manipulator Giancana soon turned the situation to his advantage. First, he's working for the CIA, and then somehow, they find themselves working for him. Giancana suspected Phyllis McGuire of having an affair in Las Vegas with top showbiz comedian Dan Rowan. He talked his CIA contact into arranging to plant a microphone in Rowan's hotel room. But the operation went terribly wrong. The installation engineers were discovered by hotel staff and arrested by police. The CIA feared the mob connection and Castro assassination plot would get out.
The agency did not want that plotting to come public, and they were afraid to death of any public examination of Giancana.
To avoid a public trial, a deeply embarrassed CIA Director of Security, Sheffield Edwards, had to confess in a memo to the FBI the whole sordid affair. When he found out, the Attorney General, Bobby Kennedy, was furious.
And he called Sheffield Edwards in to his offices. And what he said was, the next time you do something like that, you talk to me first.
One day, all this would come back to haunt both the CIA and Sam Giancana. FBI agents Roma and Rutland, watching and being verbally abused by Giancana in Chicago, now put even more pressure on the beleaguered outfit boss. Determined to drive him over the edge, the agents implemented what they called lockstep surveillance. Every day, round the clock, they were with him, following in cars. When he got out, they got out. When he walked, they walked within feet of him. They followed him on his golf round, rushing his game, jeering from the edge of the greens.
They were like this. He played golf, they were behind him, just everywhere he went. And it sent him off like a Roman candle.
They even followed him into restaurants. If he went to the restroom, an agent would also go and stand at the next urinal, which made it difficult for him to do what he had gone there to do.
It was pure, simple harassment. They weren't getting anything out of that.
Roma and Rutland were right about one thing. It drove Giancana mad. An electronic surveillance recording made in June 1963 reveals that his mob associates thought he was becoming dangerously irrational.
Wait till you hear what he's done now. He's not making good decisions. What happened? Charlie McCarthy told Roma that Mo told him to tell Kennedy to talk to him through Sinatra. For Christ's sake, that's a cardinal rule. You don't give up a legit guy. He tells Roma that Sinatra's our guy to Kennedy? More or less. I'm so I could jump out your window. And we gotta do something about this. The TV is driving this man goofy.
A maddened Giancana lashed out in a way the mob would never understand. He sued the FBI. saying their Lockstep operation violated his civil rights. Giancana's lawyer hired a film crew to shoot the FBI Lockstep in action. In a darkened courtroom, the judge was also shown Giancana's respectable lifestyle. Playing a round of golf, going to church, and visiting his father's grave. An injunction against Lockstep surveillance was granted. The FBI agents would have to keep their distance. Sam Giancana had, for the moment, beaten the FBI. But Giancana's victory soon evaporated. And to escape the continual scrutiny, he and Phyllis holidayed at Sinatra's home in Palm Beach, and then in Las Vegas. Meanwhile, the FBI was recording some disturbing mobster conversations.
Kennedy, a guy should take a knife and stab and kill that. I mean it. This is true. Honest to God. Right in the White House. Somebody's got to get rid of that.
The Kennedys' war against organized crime was fueling a dark mood among gangsters all over the United States.
They should kill the whole family. My mother and father, too.
Just a few months later, on November the 22nd, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated during a Dallas motorcade. The killing spawned a rash of conspiracy theories about who might be responsible.
There was always a strong rumor that the mob had something to do with the assassination of John Kennedy.
The rumors of Mafia involvement were fed when it was revealed that the man who gunned down Kennedy's assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was mob fixer Jack Ruby. It didn't go unnoticed that Sam Giancana had sought Ruby's help from time to time. But despite the rumors, there has never been anything to substantiate claims that the mob had any part in it. President Kennedy's death did, however, give the mob what it wanted: the immobilization of his gang-busting brother.
I think he was simply crushed and shocked by it.
An FBI informant heard Giancana's reaction. What he said was chilling.
Attorney General Robert Kennedy will not have the power that he did.
Within a year, the new president appointed a different attorney general, and Robert Kennedy was gone. Giancana thought the pressure was off. But Bobby Kennedy had rebuilt the Justice Department to smash organized crime. Even without him, the machinery worked on. Crucially, Kennedy had inspired a generation of investigative lawyers who would not give up the fight. One of Bobby's boys was a young lawyer in the Department of Justice Strike Force, David Shippers.
Always there was this Sam Giancana hanging out there, the one guy that nobody seemed to be able to touch. All he had to do was surface once, and we'd be able to put him into a conspiracy of some kind. Couldn't find anything.
Shippers' problem was a lack of hard evidence. The FBI agent's years of electronic surveillance put Giancana at the center of extortion, illegal gambling, and murder. But as the bugs were installed under presidential prerogative and not by a judicial warrant, the thousands of hours of incriminating recordings were not admissible as evidence in court. But determined to put Giancana behind bars, Shippers meticulously constructed a cunning legal snare. First, to question Giancana about his criminal career, Shippers awoke the dormant power of an investigative grand jury.
Without the grand jury, we were dead in the water. We couldn't do a thing because we had no personal subpoena power. It was a grand jury that had the subpoena power.
If you're subpoenaed to the grand jury, you got no choice. You got to show up. You may take the Fifth Amendment, but you're going to get dragged in there.
Second, Shippers had to stop Giancana hiding behind the Fifth Amendment by removing any possibility that he could incriminate himself.
If what you're saying can never be used against you, then the Fifth Amendment doesn't apply. That's where the use of immunity came in.
Granting immunity from prosecution to a top mafia boss was a bold step, and a hard sell to Shippers' boss, the U.S. Attorney.
The U.S. Attorney looked at me and he said, "Are you nuts? Are you crazy?" They said, "Well, you don't really think he would talk." We wouldn't immunize him if we didn't think he'd talk. If he doesn't talk, we'll put him in jail. If he does talk, we're going to have one heck of a great case. We'll break the whole stupid mafia.
At last, the trap was set. But would Giancana take the bait? In December 1964, the federal grand jury investigation began. To soften Giancana up, Shippers summoned his mob associates to question them in secret. Giancana feared they might be spilling their guts, but he couldn't be sure. Then, to play even more on Giancana's increasing paranoia, Shippers exploited his weak spot. He subpoenaed Phyllis McGuire.
So here comes Phyllis McGuire. We're going to put her in the grand jury. I just assumed she's going to come in and answer our questions. And the questions would essentially have been about her association, nothing embarrassing. She was the key to this whole thing.
Phyllis seemed shaken by the experience. Whether she actually testified or asserted her Fifth Amendment rights and declined to answer is still secret. But the thought that Phyllis had told them anything sent the paranoid Giancana crazy.
You know, he said over the weekend that he was pretty angry with you. Have you talked to him about it?
No comment.
Well, the word came back to us that Sam Giancana was ready to kill himself.
Is this an indication, do you think, that your relationship is all over?
No comment.
Because he thought, if she talked, I'm in trouble.
David Shippers scheduled Giancana straight after Phyllis and made sure he reinforced Sam's fears when they met just before questioning.
I had a transcript of another individual's testimony in some case. It was about a half-inch thick. And we had the court reporter put a page on top that said, "Testimony of Phyllis McGuire." And I know Sam saw it.
Shippers had Giancana right where he wanted him, on the witness stand. The Chicago boss thought he knew the rules of this game. He'd plead the Fifth Amendment to each question and go home as usual. But he didn't realize David Shippers had changed the rules.
I remember the judge saying to him, "Mr. Giancana, if you received a traffic ticket on the way in here today, nobody can touch you. You are immune from any prosecution for any crime as of this moment."
Immunity effectively stripped Giancana of Fifth Amendment protection.
And then it really hit him when the judge told him he was immune and he had to talk. He was ordered to testify. Then it hit him.
The single-minded purpose of David Shippers seemed to remind Giancana of an old adversary.
He turned to me and he said, "You're one of Bobby's boys, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, sir, I am."
Giancana had no choice. If he talked and lied, he was certain to perjure himself. If he talked and told the truth, the mob would kill him. Giancana gave his name and address, invoked the Fifth, and the trap was sprung. Sam Giancana, boss of the Chicago outfit, by refusing to answer questions, was in contempt of court and taken straight to jail.
Sam Giancana was totally awed. He was rattled. He couldn't understand how this could happen.
The judge commented that Giancana had the key to his own cell. He would be released when he decided to answer the grand jury's questions. But in the outfit, you don't talk. Giancana kept his mouth shut. This was a government victory of sorts, as it was the first time he'd been in prison for over 20 years.
That rocked the whole organized crime around the country.
But was it such a great victory? Giancana could only be held in jail until the grand jury folded a year later. On the night Giancana was released, in May 1966, there was a party at his home in Oak Park, but senior mobsters found nothing to celebrate. The outfit old guard decided Mo Giancana's high profile and volatile temper was bad for business. They gave the FBI a belated victory by stripping Sam Giancana of his rank as boss and throwing him out of Chicago for good. Giancana left the US to live in Cuernavaca, Mexico. Over the years, he built a new life for himself. No G-men dogged his steps or monitored his phone calls. And Giancana returned to what he did best, making money. In the mid-60s, as NASA prepared to put a man on the moon, Giancana was launching a gambling operation on cruise ships in the Caribbean. While the US tore itself apart over the Vietnam War, Giancana's international ambitions met with success in Guatemala and with the Shah of Iran. In 1968, his old adversary, Robert Kennedy, ran for president. But on the campaign trail, he was gunned down and killed. And although the 70s saw an aging Giancana undergo abdominal surgery, he enjoyed a quiet, wealthy life. Then, suddenly, a dark episode from his past cast a chill shadow over Sam Giancana, his connection to the CIA. In January 1975, a Senate Select Committee began investigating illegal CIA operations, specifically CIA involvement in plans to assassinate Castro. Its findings would shock Chairman Senator Church.
It is simply intolerable that any agency of the government of the United States may engage in murder.
The committee was very interested in hearing from any mobsters consulted by the CIA in their Castro assassination plots. Although lying low in Mexico, Giancana had been snatched from his hideaway and suddenly found himself deported back into the United States. The press were waiting.
Giancana, why did you have to leave Mexico, sir?
Why? I don't know.
Mr. Giancana, what are your future plans?
The future plans of one-time boss Giancana were to re-establish his cut of Chicago outfit operations.
Once he arrived in Chicago, he announced to the entire organization that he was back and he was the man.
But a new generation ran the Chicago outfit. They had no room for the aging Giancana.
By that time, a lot of his rivals were in the penitentiary or dead because of what we'd been doing to them.
Knocked out of action in Chicago, Giancana received a subpoena that ordered him to appear before the Senate committee without fail in Washington, D.C. on June the 24th, 1975. But Sam Giancana never made it. On June the 19th, 1975, 4 days after celebrating his 67th birthday, Sam Giancana was at home in Oak Park, Chicago. He was cooking in his basement kitchen. Routine police patrols noticed nothing unusual. Health problems meant he could not eat spicy foods. So it seems the sausage and peppers was a late-night snack for a friend. A friend Giancana liked and trusted. A close friend. But the Mafia hadn't quite finished with Sam Giancana. The way he was killed showed that the mob no longer trusted him to keep quiet.
He was shot in the mouth, so that you might draw the conclusion that somebody was leaving a message. Don't talk.
It was somewhat interesting that somebody that powerful was killed, so there had to be a major decision among the powers that be in the mob.
Sam Giancana's extraordinary career had lasted over 50 years, spanning the heyday of organized crime in America. In the years after Giancana, show business stars began to shun any mob connection. The glamorous image of gangsters became tarnished. People realized they were just killers. Never again would a mafia boss be so closely associated with the bright stars of show business or the dark underbelly of politics. The FBI and the Justice Department had struck the first serious blows aimed at breaking the Mafia. John Gotti was the most famous gangster since Al Capone.
His picture's on page 1 of newspapers. His name is all over TV. He's a headline figure.
He brutally murdered his way to become head of the most powerful crime family in America.
John Gotti took charge of what's called the Gambino crime family shortly after his reputed predecessor was gunned down.
Addicted to fame, he adored the attention of the world's media and became America's most high-profile criminal.
He was Moby Dick in the organized crime world. Everybody wanted to prosecute John Gotti.
In New York, the Gotti trial is the hottest show off Broadway.
He made a mockery of the law, time and again walking free from court.
I'm not saying he didn't do it. I simply had my doubts.
But overconfident and arrogant, he thought he could take on the might of the FBI.
Here was this guy, he had this come and get me attitude to law enforcement. He made fun of them.
But what he did didn't just spell his end, but the ruination of America's most powerful crime family. A Monday evening in December 1985, in central Manhattan, New York. At Sparks Steakhouse, Paul Castellano, one of the most powerful mobsters in New York, arrives for dinner, accompanied by his driver, Tommy Bellotti. 4 men are waiting for them. Across the street, 2 men watch the events from a parked car.
At least 3 gunmen in New York City tonight shot and killed a man identified by police as Paul Castellano, reputed chief of the Gambino Mafia family. That's the nation's most powerful organized crime organization.
Well, the king is dead. Paul Castellano, reputed boss of bosses, executed on a New York City street yesterday.
The assassination of Paul Castellano was one of the most dramatic hits in Mafia history. The murder of a family boss was a once-in-a-generation event. Most surprising, though, was the man who masterminded the hit, John Gotti.
Gotti was just not a well-known or well-respected figure prior to the killing of Castellano.
I mean, his initial forte in organized crime was hijacking trucks and beating people up and killing people. He was a thug, in my view.
Gotti started his life in crime in the late 1950s as a low-level street thug. But he had big ambitions. He had his eye on joining the most profitable criminal organization in America.
Mob profits are going to top $100 billion this year.
Add to that, the inflated costs of consumer goods and services in the total bill is more than $77 for every American
every year.
They're into everything from low-level street crimes to sophisticated white-collar crime.
Garbage carting, the piers, the garment industry.
Labor racketeering, and of course, murder.
In 1973, Gotti was given the opportunity to join the most powerful of the 5 mafia families in New York, the Gambinos.
Conservative estimates indicate that the Gambino family was making easily $400 to $500 million a year.
Head of the family was Don Carlo Gambino. His nephew had recently been kidnapped and murdered by members of the Irish mob. Gambino wanted revenge, and he offered Gotti his chance to make his bones in the Mafia.
Making your bones means you proved your tutorship and that you are now ready for full-fledged membership as a maid or soldier in the family.
Gotti was part of the team that killed James McBratney in revenge for the kidnapping. He was sentenced to 7 years, but was out in less than 2. On his release, Gotti was richly rewarded. He was initiated into the Mafia and dramatically promoted straight to captain in charge of his own crew.
It's one of the most violent and ruthless crews in the Gambino family. And they're engaged in everything from truck hijackings to murders and loan sharking.
They were really crazy people. And hijack is really a very violent people. And that's what Gotti was.
By 1976, Gotti was a rising star in New York's most powerful crime organization.
You know, you can get pretty far in life if you're willing to shoot somebody who doesn't give you your way, right? That's a pretty significant advantage.
Then, a change at the head of the family would allow Gotti to aim for the highest prize of all. After 20 years at the head of the Gambino family, Carlo Gambino died. His brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, took charge. Castellano saw himself as more of a businessman than a street mobster, something that riled roughnecks like Gotti.
Paul was remote and sort of removed from the street people.
He didn't associate with his own members of organized crime. They felt he thought he was too important and too wealthy. They called him the Pope sometimes, or the man on the hill.
From his mansion on Staten Island, Castellano took a dim view of street crews like Gotti's and was cutting them out of the most profitable deals.
It was the kind of crew that Paul Castellano didn't really favor because they were looked upon as hard muscle guys, jaw breakers, knee breakers, but pea-brained.
He was a family of the haves and the have-nots. Castellano and all his side made all the money. The Gotti's crews are all struggling, just trying to earn enough money to get by.
Gotti began to nurture a growing hatred of Paul Castellano. But this factionalism within the family was not the only problem that the Gambinos were facing. The government was getting its act together and was planning to wage war on the Mafia. For years, the Mafia had prospered as only the low-level members would get convicted, whilst the top guys, the brains behind operations, always managed to keep their hands clean.
Very often, in a Darwinian sense, you took out the lame and the weak and you allowed the strong to survive.
The bosses, the underbosses, the consiglieri, even the capos, the captains, who ran the street units, they never pulled the trigger. They never really extorted directly money from anyone. They were on the receiving end, but they weren't on the working end.
But now, the FBI were going to target the top-ranking members and build new squads to take on each of the 5 New York families. Head of the Gambino squad was Bruce Mao.
When we started out in 1980, there's very little intelligence in the Gambino family, so we basically started from scratch.
Mao had to discover a way to break into an organization which operated by a strict code of silence.
When you investigate a crime family, you always look for a weak link and try to find some place where they're vulnerable, where somebody's talking. We like to find a gossip. And one of the first cases we opened was targeting us John Gotti.
John Gotti had a sidekick, a friend who went back to his teenage days. Name was Fat Angie, Angelo Ruggiero. Angie Ruggiero was intimately known as Quack Quack.
How do we guess?
He gossiped a lot. He liked to talk. He liked to blab.
In 1981, Mao's team got court permission to tap Angelo Ruggiero's phone and then bug his home. It wasn't long before the wires provided dramatic results.
During the Ruggiero wire, we realized that These guys were involved in major heroin activity. They were pushing approximately 50 kilos of heroin in a 6-month period here in New York.
Don't worry about nothing, all right? How about our friend over there? What time you be at, Pete?
The FBI arrested Angelo Ruggiero in 1983 on drugs charges, but not Gotti. They had nothing to link him directly to the crime.
We know John Gotti knew about it. We know we got a piece of it, but he wasn't actually involved in the physical trafficking of the product itself.
But he wasn't off the hook yet. Although the Mafia profited from narcotics, many bosses, including Paul Castellano, made a rule officially banning their crews from dealing drugs on pain of death.
He had this edict, and it was very effective. He could use it whenever he wanted to get rid of somebody he didn't like if they got mixed up in narcotics.
Castellano now had the perfect excuse to rid himself of Gotti.
Castellano wasn't a big fan of John Gotti, Ruggiero, and they weren't like his fair-haired boys. So he definitely would have had him killed. And he had the manpower and the horsepower and the firepower to do it.
It was a kill or be killed situation.
Gotti realized he had to strike first. But the killing of a mob boss was no ordinary hit. The Mafia have strict rules. He would need permission from the heads of the other 4 New York families. But a lowly Mafia captain could easily be killed just for suggesting that he wanted to take out his boss.
Now, for the first time, Gotti, and this was unforeseen, showed strategic sense and unforeseen acumen.
Gotti gambled that the other bosses were tired of Castellano's high-handed manner and would be happy to see the back of him. His gamble paid off. Amazingly, 3 of the New York bosses gave the go-ahead for the upstart capo to take Castellano out. He now needed a hit team. In an audacious move, he approached his most powerful Gambino rival, wealthy Castellano loyalist, Sammy Gravano. He successfully enticed him to be his right-hand man. From his new recruits, Gotti discovered some crucial inside information.
Now, Castellano had become so overconfident. He had been the boss for 10 years. There'd been no attempts against him. He felt immune. And he rode around only with one lieutenant, a guy by the name of Gotti. And he was unarmed, no bodyguards.
They learned that Castellano was supposed to have dinner at a restaurant called Sparks Steakhouse on the night of December 16, 1985.
They knew the hour, they knew how he was going to arrive there.
And so they assembled their crew, their hit teams.
He devised a way of killing Castellano. And it really was a brilliant coup that he engineered.
Gotti worked out he could use the crowded streets as cover for the hitmen.
He had everybody dress in white trench coats and also wear Russian fur hats. And the idea was that everybody would look the same, so any passers-by on the street could not really make a solid identification.
In a final bold move, Gotti would be only feet away to oversee the execution. His new right-hand man, Sammy Gravano, would be sat beside him. What happened next would change the Mafia forever.
The 4 shooters were waiting for him, and You've seen the pictures. They shot him dead right there as they got out of the car.
You talk about shock and awe, like in the past Iraqi wars. This was shock and awe for the Gambino family. Within a few days, the whole Gambino family knew that John Gotti did this.
Now the scale of Gotti's ambition finally became clear. In another show of clever strategy, he packed a meeting of Gambino captains with his own supporters.
Frank Chico stands up and says, I nominate John Gotti to be the next boss of the Gambino family. Of course, Gotti sitting there as one of the captains. John was elected the boss of the Gambino family. This is in January of 1986.
John Gotti took charge of what's called the Gambino crime family shortly after his reputed predecessor was gunned down.
And the man that succeeded him, or is believed to have succeeded him, is a man by the name of John Gotti.
So you think he's behind this?
Well, certainly I would think he heads the enforcement arm of the Gambino family, and certainly they'd have to consult with him.
Until now, the Mafia had been a secret society exerting its power from the shadows.
A traditional mob boss looked to be under the radar. They wanted to control their criminal activities through intermediaries. They did not want to be seen as a powerful individual who could be targeted by law enforcement. Gotti was precisely the opposite.
Gotti attracted attention in a way no other boss had ever done.
Immediately after becoming the boss of the Gambino family, his whole exterior changed. Previously, he wore windbreakers, black T-shirts. He had the jewelry of a two-bit mafioso. Suddenly, overnight, he switches. He's now wearing tailored suits, cashmere coats, even monogrammed socks. I mean, he went to great lengths to have this appearance of being an emperor.
45 years old, Gotti has become quickly recognizable, if only for his custom-made suits and his frequent stops at the Stylorama hair salon.
He's got very good taste. He likes his hair extremely perfect. He's such a gentleman that, you know, you can't believe it.
He was also a big-time gambler, sometimes flashing as much as $100,000 in a weekend.
Gotti loved the limelight. He talked about it all the time, he had his public. He didn't mind being stared at in restaurants. He boasted how important he was. He was a megalomaniac.
The press nicknamed him the Dapper Don. But for all the fancy suits, Gotti was a street mobster, and he couldn't shake free from his past. Even as he ascended to the throne of the Gambino family, Gotti was awaiting trial on an assault charge. In 1984, nearly 2 years earlier, he had attacked Romuald Pajsek, a refrigerator salesman from Queens, in an absurd incident.
That was a traffic dispute. It was about a parking space. And John Gotti slapped Romuald Pajsek in the face.
And they also stole about $300 from him.
Pajsek didn't know who he was, went to the police. That's all that case was.
Somebody who's going to be in the mob boss doesn't put himself in the position where he can be arrested for what is essentially a meaningless incident.
Then before it goes to trial, all this Castellano stuff happens, and all of a sudden, poor Romuald Pajsek is testifying against the #1 criminal in the country.
Pajsek had good reason to fear him when a terrifying story from Gotti's past surfaced in the press.
In 1980, Gotti's 12-year-old son was killed when he ran out in front of a neighbor's car.
His son ran out into the street, a next-door neighbor, not seeing him and not having done anything wrong, clearly an accident, killed the young man.
Media stories told how the distraught driver, John Favara, was menaced by Gotti's wife with a baseball bat when he tried to apologize. After that, Favara tried to flee the neighborhood.
He was selling his house and moving, and the day before he moved, he was kidnapped. And the story that was circulated was that Gotti himself cut him in half with a chainsaw. When that story hit the media, everybody was terrified of Gotti.
And having heard what happened to Favara, Pajsek had a sudden change of heart about testifying.
If I did go stand there and say that this is Mr. Gotti and this is Mr. Coletta, they assaulted me and robbed me, I'm not sure.
Pajsek's loss of memory spawned lurid headlines.
The brake linings on his car had been cut, and also he'd been threatened by people on the street.
So, you know, who's to blame him for the I forgot stuff?
Gotti walked free from court for the first time. He had defeated New York's combined forces of law and order. But less than 2 weeks later, in April 1986, he was back on trial. This time, it was the turn of the federal prosecutors. They were much more serious charges, and young assistant prosecutor John Gleason hoped they would hit Gotti with a maximum sentence of 20 years.
It was a racketeering case with what we call predicate acts, particular crimes that they committed as part of their membership in the Gambino family.
It should have been a humiliation for Gotti, but instead, he turned it into a photo opportunity.
The supermodel of mobsters, Gotti on magazine covers, newspaper headlines. One New York tabloid even followed his court suit, the cut, not the criminal, in a daily fashion column called Gotti's Garb. And every day at the courthouse, the Dapper Don plays to a sellout crowd.
I'm interested in the case because Gotti's kind of cool.
Gotti has been a cover boy. He's probably the first mob cover boy.
Gotti happily obliged his public with a stellar performance, nonchalant and apparently unconcerned by the trial going on around him.
Overnight, it became a media sensation because of the attraction to John Gotti.
Gotti even tried to assiduously cultivate members of the press.
He would have espresso with some brandy that he would pour in, or anisette, and he often invited the women reporters, never the male reporters, to share these drinks with him. So he opened doors for the women. He considered himself a new element in organized crime, and he was somebody who was untouchable.
Although he played the part of the Dapper Don, when the trial started, he fell back on the tactics of the street.
He was constantly berating me. I'd walk past him to go to sidebar, and he would say, "Your mother's a whore. You're a junkie."
Worse still, Gotti's lawyers proceeded to lay into the prosecutor's witnesses, who were all ex-mobsters.
Their records were even worse than Gotti's record. They were all murderers, horrendous, violent criminals. And at the same time, there was really no bugged evidence. There was no electronic eavesdropping. And lo and behold, Gotti was acquitted.
When the verdict was read today, gasps were heard in the courtroom. Gotti smiled, then glared over at the prosecutors and shouted, "Shame on them."
The jury's job was to decide whether or not the defendants were guilty. They did their job, and that is the end of that.
But what nobody knew at the time was that Gotti's victory had always been guaranteed.
Gotti had an insurance policy that he'd get a not guilty verdict. One of the jurors was bribed.
Later, juror George Pape would be found guilty of accepting $60,000 to withhold a guilty verdict. But at the time, the case was a disaster for the government.
It was a prosecutor's nightmare. It was a horror show. And John Gotti loved it. He enjoyed every minute of it. He knew he wasn't going to get convicted. He knew he had a free ride. He knew there was no downside for him in the trial, only an upside.
No, it's no problem. No problem.
Gotti had made a mockery of the court again. But the attempt to try to convict him had a higher price. In the course of the trial, the prosecution had called 2 of Gotti's crew as witnesses, and in doing so revealed them as FBI informants. Two years after the trial, Willie Boy Johnson, a childhood friend of Gotti's, was found murdered. The other informant, Billy Batista, was never found.
Now this incensed the FBI because it was giving away what they considered 2 valuable informers in essentially what they considered a weak case. And it caused not just a dispute, but a rift.
As each law enforcement agency set their sights on Gotti, rifts and rivalries grew up between them, seriously hampering efforts to convict him.
It really was an indictment of law enforcement that for so many years we allowed them to gain strength, not cooperating with one another.
You had the FBI investigating him. You had the Queens DA's office investigating him. You had the Manhattan DA's office investigating him. You had something called the State Organized Crime Task Force investigating him. And they were actually, it's so comical, at one time, 3 of them had separate bugs in Gotti's Queens headquarters, the Bergen Fish and Hunt Club. I mean, it was a joke.
Next to try and nail Gotti was the New York State Organized Crime Task Force. Its boss, Ronald Goldstock, believed that one of his bugs had recorded Gotti ordering a shooting. And so, they became the 3rd organization to take on the Dapper Don.
John Gotti, alleged in the indictment to be the boss of the Gambino family, is now under indictment. This then is another in a long line of actions taken by state, local, and federal officials, which will inevitably change the face of organized crime.
In New York City this morning, the man police call the country's most powerful crime boss faces the possibility of life in prison for allegedly ordering the shooting of a union official.
That union official, John O'Connor, had smashed up a restaurant owned by a friend of Gotti's. In revenge, he was shot 4 times in the back. But survived. In the courtroom, witnesses testified that Gotti had ordered the shootings, and Goldstock was convinced that he had the evidence he needed on the tapes.
My sense was everybody in the courtroom who was watching the case and how it went in believed there was going to be a conviction.
But when the tapes were played in court, the terrible quality of the recordings placed serious doubt on the solidity of the case.
A jury brought in its verdict today on the man called the Dapper Don.
How say you with respect to defendant John Gotti? We find him not guilty.
We were stunned by the acquittal of Gotti. We did not believe that that could have happened.
Gotti walked free from court a 3rd time.
There was nothing to connect up Mr. Gotti from what happened. Zilch. I'm not saying he didn't do it. I simply had my doubts.
The government thinks you just say Mafia and you sit down on your backside and that's enough. It's not enough in America to say Mafia and sit down.
That night, As Gotti celebrated his victory, the media bestowed on him a new title, the Teflon Don, because no charges ever stuck.
We're all happy. We're all happy. We got a good decision. The whole city should be happy.
There was actually street parties. People came out and cheered him. So here you have this cruel, vicious killer who's looked upon in some way as a hero. It's a terrifying and it's a terrible indictment, not just of the media, but also of this vicarious kick the public gets out of figures like John Gotti.
They wanted to see something like Vito Corleone, Jesse James, and he saw that. He milked it for all he could milk it for. He was cast as this dapper Don, this Teflon Don. It was a gloss on him he certainly didn't deserve. He was just a thug.
Never before had a criminal appeared so powerful, so beyond the law. John Gotti had emerged triumphant from court 3 times in just 4 years, and the government were desperate that he be brought down.
A lot of people for the first time were saying, you'll never get him. He's a Teflon Don, he's untouchable.
But in 1989, after 4 years of painstaking surveillance work, the FBI were ready to make their move.
Our motto was patience and perseverance. Take all the time you want and just stick at it through thick or thin.
And their years of patience were beginning to pay off. Slowly, Mao's team made contact with a wide range of people connected to the Gambino family.
There's a lot of people out there that looked like they were regular, undiluted wise guys who were actually informants for the FBI.
The FBI learned that Gotti now liked to spend his time in the Ravenite Social Club on Mulberry Street in New York's Little Italy district. Mao ordered 24-hour surveillance of the club.
This is Little Italy. It's a very hard place to park cars, to conduct surveillance without being discovered.
The FBI covertly secured a lease of a building with a direct view to the door of the Ravenite. They installed thousands of dollars of camera equipment, and studying hours of footage, they discovered something remarkable. Gotti was so overconfident that he was openly running his organization from the Ravenite Social Club.
He never seemed to understand he was running a secret organization, an underground criminal outfit. And he demands that at least once a week, his soldiers or his capos have to show up and kiss his ring like he's a pope.
They're not supposed to meet in public. They're supposed to be clandestine. They normally use safe houses. And from Monday through Friday, John Gotti would hold court at this club 5 nights a week.
And he gives Bruce Mao and the FBI incredible opportunities to unearth evidence that only a fool would hand over to them. They could photograph everybody going in and out of the Ravenite. They find out people they didn't know were in any way connected. Union leaders, politicians, mobsters that were not known as Gambino members. Gotti hands them a who's who in the mob.
Good though the surveillance was, photos and video from outside the club would not make a case against Gotti. They needed to be able to hear what was being said inside. Mao called in the FBI's head of electronic surveillance, Jim Kallstrom, to get a device into the club.
I don't know if you've driven down Mulberry Street in New York. Very close environment. A lot of mobsters living there, coming and going. So to make an entry into a building covertly, you know, it's not simple. Very complicated.
Kallstrom's people are professional burglars. They're lockpicks. They can break through locks and go through alarms. They can break into safes. That's what they do. At the risk of retribution, they could be shot or killed going in there.
And there's never a time when the risk is zero. Never. Never a time.
Informants had told Mao's team that meetings took place at a table at the rear of the club.
They broke into the club. They got through the lock. They disabled the alarm system. And they were to install a bug in the club.
With the bugs in place, the FBI thought that they were finally in a winning position. But they would discover it wasn't that simple.
You couldn't hear yourself talk in the Ravenite Social Club. Extremely noisy. Music played, all on purpose to stop any microphone.
And the tech guys went in several times. We put a bug below the table, we put a bug above the table, in the wall, and this had 5 bugs on this one table. We brought in tech guys from Washington to try to filter out all the background noise, but it just didn't work out.
They couldn't make out any words in the recordings, although it was possible to make out Gotti's voice. But there was a puzzle. It disappeared for long periods of time. So the team went back to the videotapes of the exterior of the club, looking for any sort of lead. It was then that they made a dramatic breakthrough by watching the door next to the club.
And here's really the power of surveillance. All of a sudden we started to figure out that there was a certain woman who would leave almost like clockwork when certain events took place.
Mao checked all their logs and realized that the woman left at the exact same time that Gotti's voice disappeared from the audio recordings. The FBI now discovered that there was an internal staircase leading from the club to the apartments above. And a background check on the tenants revealed why Gotti's voice was disappearing from their recordings.
Apartment 10 was occupied by the widow of a Gambino soldier by the name of Mike Sorelli. Gotti's minions would tell her, hey, we need to use your apartment for an hour or so. She'd go to the neighbor, watch TV. Gotti and his minions would go up there and have their administration meetings in their living room. So that was the break that we needed.
And I remember Bruce Mao calling me and saying we had the Eureka location.
But now, they were faced with a new problem. How to get into an apartment where somebody lived.
Whole nother ball game to get in there. Because you have a widow living there 24 hours, 7 days a week, and you have to get into her apartment.
Mao's team learned that Mrs. Sorelli will be going out of town for Thanksgiving. So in late November 1989, Kallstrom's team returned to Mulberry Street and placed a bug in her apartment.
And that's when the waiting started.
As weeks passed without results, Mao's team began to fear the worst. If Gotti suspected he had been bugged, the entire operation would be over.
You always wonder, Did they discover something? Did they make the tech guys? Did they leave a little piece of wire behind? You know, has it been compromised?
Then, on a late November evening, the team observe Gotti and his henchmen enter the club, and they get ready to listen on the new bugs.
And sure enough, they open the door for apartment number 10. And one thing we didn't know at the time was that John Gotti's deaf in one ear. So they couldn't whisper, they had to talk like we're talking now, loud and clear.
And right there is our microphone.
You tell this punk, me, John Gotti, you're separate, you cocksucker.
John Gotti's voice was coming through loud and clear.
So here's Gotti, who warns everybody not to talk on the peril of death if they're ever picked up on eavesdropping. He goes up there and he's talking openly.
He would go over stuff over and over again.
Now listen to me, fella. Now listen. You know it's separate.
So it wasn't like, what did he say? If you didn't get it the first time, just wait a few minutes, you'd get it again.
John talks about whacking DB, Robert DiBernardo.
When DB got whacked, they told me a story. I was in jail. And I whacked him. I knew why it was being done. I done it anyway.
And John's classic line was, we're not sure he's a rat, but when in doubt, you kill him.
It was a clear admission to a murder.
It was what Mao had been waiting for several years. And Gotti handed it to him on a silver platter.
Where are we going?
All told, we monitored a total of 5 conversations, maybe 7.5 hours of tape all told. But they were like the top 40 hits.
And we knew we were off to the races. We knew we were going to have a really good case.
Be it an hour from now, be it tonight, or 100 years from now when I'm in jail, it's going to be arroz and orange.
On December the 11th, 1990, the FBI arrested John Gotti for the murders he had spoken of on the tapes. Along with his closest henchman, underboss Sammy Gravano. At the pre-trial hearing, Gotti, the seasoned pro, was apparently unconcerned.
Pretty good. You know they're going to try and keep you in jail. They say you're in danger.
At the time of his arrest, Gotti was his normal braggadocio self. He was cocky, confident, you know, smiling.
He didn't know what was coming. He didn't know those tapes were coming. And he sat down, played part of the tapes, and he knew right away what we already knew, which was we had a great case. There was no longer a Mr. Cool sitting there. He was like a cornered animal, and I enjoyed every moment of it.
But before the trial even started, there would be one more twist. One of the FBI recordings had caught Gotti bad-mouthing his own underboss, Sammy Gravano, behind his back.
Sammy knew there was something bad in those tapes, not just for them getting convicted, but something bad in terms of his relationship with John Gotti. But he didn't know what it was.
Gravano now broke with Mafia law and approached the FBI without his boss's permission, demanding to hear the tapes.
Never forget, as long as I live, the playing of that December 12th tape in its entirety for Sammy.
It's basically an hour tirade against Sammy the Bull Gravano. He calls him the greed-eyed monster, how much he hates Sammy, thinks he's greedy. He talks about firing him.
Every time I turn around, there's a new copy popping.
More importantly, the recordings had Gotti accusing Gravano of several killings.
Every time we got a partner and don't agree with us, we kill him. He kills me, okay.
Gravano was just red. He just wanted to burst. He was ready to explode. He was so upset about his loyal, his wonderful boss just bad-mouthing behind his back.
Sammy's looking down at the transcript, and he takes his headphones and throws them down on the table and says, "Don't gloat, guys. Don't gloat."
And Gravano realized, why should I die in jail for a family I no longer believe in? I want to become a government witness.
At that moment, Gravano decided to break the Mafia's code of silence, the omerta, and turn against his boss and his entire Mafia family.
We never thought for a minute Sammy would flip. I thought John would flip before Sammy would flip. And I really didn't think there was any chance in the world that John would even think about flipping.
He told us about a lot of murders that he committed, which we didn't know about. I think there were a total of 19. He gave us more details as to the Castellano homicide, exactly how the whole thing went down. He was in the car with Gotti.
With Gravano on side, what had already been a strong case was now airtight. Outside the court, it was a typical Gotti circus. He was still, after all, the Teflon Don.
It's not just average guys caught up in the Gotti spectacle. A who's who from Hollywood came to Brooklyn to take in the show.
This is one of the great dramas that's going on today.
The trial was really high drama because it was like the #1 media event here in New York, so the reporters every day filled up half the courtroom. We all sat with Gotti's minions. And the highlight was when Gravano testified for 9 days.
Today, Gravano explained how the two men plotted the 1985 murder of then-boss Paul Castellano and his driver, Tommy Bellotti. How they watched the hit go down outside a New York City steakhouse and then drove past the bullet-riddled bodies.
He didn't diminish his own criminality, admitted to 16 murders. He admitted what he had to admit. He was a lights-out witness. I've been doing this now 27 years as a prosecutor and a judge. There was no better witness than Sammy Gravano. He killed him. And everybody in the courtroom knew that John Gotti was going to be convicted once Sammy Gravano testified, including John Gotti.
When the jury announced their verdict, Gotti's crew incited a riot outside the court.
I'm ashamed to say I'm an American in this country. That's what I'm ashamed of.
This is wrong what happened to him. What was he, a criminal?
Gotti had been found guilty on all charges in June 1992. Racketeering and 5 murders, including the Castellano hit.
It took the government 6 years to finally get the so-called Teflon Don, but this time it was the prosecution's turn to gloat. The legendary luck of John Gotti finally ran out.
The Teflon is gone, the Don is covered with Velcro, and every charge in the indictment stuck.
It was quite an occasion. I still get emotional talking about it now.
For one member of the prosecution team in particular, it was a moment to be savored.
Guys, come on.
You can imagine my feelings.
How does it feel to be the man who got Gotti? Don't get him nervous now.
Well, this was my second trial. You know, I worked long and hard in that first case for a couple of years with a 7-month trial, only to have a juror get bought. We couldn't have been happier.
We were pleased. We were happy.
Are you smiling again?
Gotti was sentenced to life in jail, spending 23 hours of each day in solitary confinement. Gotti's indiscretions incriminated an entire tier of Gambino captains.
The FBI itself could not have handpicked a better candidate to be the head of one of the major mob families in New York than John Gotti.
Because of him, most of these captains were arrested, convicted, taken off the street. And they'd say, John and his friggin' big mouth, here I am. They hated this guy.
He was an absolute ruination for the Mafia. He was so inept, unqualified, and incompetent that he single-handedly wrecked the Gambino crime family.
John Gotti died in jail in 2002, age 61, after serving 10 years of his life sentence. To some New Yorkers, Gotti will always be a modern-day Robin Hood. But he was never anything more than a thug. His only legacy was the destruction of the most powerful mafia family in history.
His legacy, just another boss who killed the previous boss, gets arrested, dies in jail. No more, no less.
Joe Colombo was a man who liked to do things differently. He was the only mobster who dared to protest against the FBI.
You don't go to war with the United States government. Nobody goes to war with the United States government. They're too powerful.
But Colombo did. His weapon of choice, mass protest.
There's a conspiracy in this country against every Italian American. We've been saying this, we'll continue to say it, and it's only till it touches them.
But in following this path, Colombo moved from crime into politics and the glare of publicity. On the way, he broke the cardinal rule of the Mafia.
He was the one that chose publicity over silence. He was the one that chose cameras over staying in the shadows.
Colombo became infatuated with fame and celebrity and completely forgot the way a mobster should live.
This incensed the old mafioso. They didn't want that. And he was told, stop this. If you continue, you're gonna pay a price.
In the heart of Manhattan, in front of thousands of witnesses, Joe Colombo would face his day of reckoning. Across the East River from Manhattan lies the borough of Brooklyn. In 1962, this was Mafia country. The hunting ground of Joseph Colombo. The 40-year-old mobster lived and worked these streets. He was a capo, or captain, a mid-ranking mafioso in New York's Profaci crime family. One of the 5 crime families that dominated the city's criminal underworld. Then, in 1964, an event took place that would supercharge his career. Colombo was summoned by his mafia boss to an important meeting. Joe Magliocco had a mission for him. It was a hit, and a particularly dangerous one. For Joseph Colombo, this was nothing new. He had already killed people, about 11 murders to date. Rubbing people out was what capos did.
You would never advance to capo without killing.
If they tell you to kill somebody, you go out and kill somebody. And you don't resign except feet first.
You would not even be considered for capo unless you've murdered somebody on orders from the boss.
So until this moment, Colombo was nothing special within mafia circles. Just one killer amongst many.
There are plenty of people like that around. Typical kind of hoodlum, nothing outstanding about him that I know of.
But that was about to change forever. The target this time was none other than Carlo Gambino. From a young hoodlum, he had become New York's biggest mafia godfather.
Gambino was generally regarded as the most powerful boss in the city.
He was unquestionably the most fearsome mobster in town. Gambino had built his family into New York's toughest clan.
He could take on 3 out of the 5 families at one time. That's how big his organization was. And he had some of the best killers that they were. If you killed Carlo Gambino, that was the kiss of death.
So, rather than kill Carlo Gambino, Colombo decided to tip him off. He was now breaking one of the mob's most important rules. Every mafia family relies on unswerving loyalty from its members. This is one of the so-called 10 Commandments. Your family comes first. Always.
You swear allegiance to that family and only that family. Nothing will come before your family, your mafia. And everything else takes second place to it.
But Colombo completely rejected this. He went straight to the man he'd been told to kill, Carlo Gambino. The move worked well. Gambino was grateful. First, he ordered Colombo's boss, Joe Magliocco, to retire. Then, as a reward for Colombo's bold move, he was given Magliocco's old job. He was promoted to head of a family, renamed in his honor. The Profaci family became the Colombo family in 1964.
Sometimes if you want to advance, you have to make bold moves. Very bold, but it worked out.
Colombo had made mafia history. He became the youngest godfather in a generation. Thanks to Colombo's new position, there were now real benefits. He could live off the proceeds of crime paid to him by his criminal family members.
Well, if you're the godfather, you're the boss of the family, and depending upon the size of that family, all your capos have to be bringing an envelope up to you. Everything that is brought into the family is kicked up to the head of the family.
Colombo eagerly took over the best money-making operations, and the cash rolled in.
Anywhere where there was money to be made, you could find organized crime.
They know how to make money out of just about anything.
There was illegal gambling. Sometimes games were rigged to earn extra cash.
Well, the gambling racket was basically, you could have a floating crap game or a poker game, and it could be moved anywhere within the city of New York. I mean, it had cocktail waitress and everything. It was a high-end roller, and it still goes on today.
Colombo and his men didn't just make money from the bets, but also from loan sharking to gamblers or anyone who needed cash fast. Loan sharking, or Shylock loans, charged borrowers huge rates of weekly interest, known as the VIG.
Basically, there are many people out there that need money, and banks would not that readily give them the money because they had no financial backing. Organized crime would. Of course, he would pay an interest on the money, almost 25 to 26%. If you miss a payment, they'll double the VIG.
If you carried on missing payments, you could expect a beating, or worse. The loan shark book of any mafia operator could run into hundreds of thousands of dollars of weekly income. It was an easy way to make cash on the street. Colombo also made money from hijacking trucks and cargoes. The stolen goods were then sold on, known as fencing. Added to the mix was extortion, protection rackets, and infamous mafia-run union scams. Unions controlled everything from construction to garbage. So the mafia took over the unions. They plundered the pension funds and set up trade monopolies that benefited only them. As a result, Colombo was getting seriously rich. The only problem was, this wealth began to attract the attention of the police and the FBI. A couple of years into Colombo's reign, the authorities started to look hard at organized crime in New York. In the previous decade, the police and FBI had been slow to recognize the threat posed by the mafia. Now Colombo and the city's mafia families were in their sights. In September 1966, the FBI and Queens District Attorney's Office made its first breakthrough. A massive bust at the La Stella restaurant in the east of the city.
La Stella was a restaurant on Queens Boulevard in Queens, and they brought in the mob chiefs from all over the country, and they all sat down and broke bread and went over their operations, and we were able to get information from an informant that they were all there, and we raided the place.
The Queens District Attorney made a big deal of the raid.
These are 13 of the top mob leaders in the country. Their meeting has nationwide implications in our opinion, and as far as we know, this is a unique meeting. We have never had such a meeting of top family leaders and gangdom leaders in this county to our knowledge.
It heralded the start of a new fight back against the mob, and especially the New York families. Colombo, as a family head, was now on the law enforcement radar. In 1966, he was subpoenaed to stand as a witness in a federal investigation into racketeering. It meant appearing before what's known under the American system as a grand jury.
everybody's afraid of what's going to happen in a federal grand jury because it forces people to come in to appear and give testimony, and now you lock them into that testimony.
Colombo could no longer hide in the shadows. He was dragged into a very public arena. But when he came to court, he stuck to mob protocols and refused to testify, insisting he was just an honest businessman.
One of the codes of the mob is don't make yourself a target. Don't make yourself to go out there and bring attention to you and to our operation. What they call our thing, Cosa Nostra.
The code of silence is held by a lot of different groups. And the old bosses believed in keeping a low profile and your mouth.
His strict observance of this tradition cost him. His punishment was 30 days in jail, an easy stretch. But for Joe Colombo, this was an epiphany. He realized what attracted the FBI and police to him was his wealth without any visible source of income. So he devised a perfect solution to deal with the new heat from the FBI. He would become an ordinary working Joe, and he passed down a diktat that all his family members had to hold down a real job too, a facade of legality. Colombo led by example. He worked as a salesman at Cantalupo Realty, based here at 86th Street in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn. On their books, the Godfather was a $35,000 a year employee. In reality, he conducted his Mafia business at the offices. Now, when pressed by the authorities, he could explain his lifestyle. And what a lifestyle it was. The money flooded in from his numerous rackets. And Colombo was starting to get carried away with his status. He headed across town to party and enjoy the good life in Manhattan. He became increasingly flamboyant and extravagant. Bedecked in expensive jewelry and suits, Colombo cruised around the city in flashy Cadillacs.
Joey liked to dress like the biggest actors. He liked to dress as good as Frank Sinatra. He liked to dress as good as Dean Martin. He didn't want to look like the per schlep. He just didn't buy a suit off the rack. The suits were tailor-made, silk shirts. He had everything made. Everything was tailored. He was meticulous about his clothes.
By now, other mobsters had learned this was not a good idea. Flashing the cash drew the attention of the authorities.
Carlo Gambino, you'd never see him in a nightclub or a bar or checking out with women. He was just low-key.
And the other Mafia clans were right to worry. Colombo had reignited attention from the FBI and the income tax authorities, who started to look even more closely at his finances. $35,000 a year and tailor-made suits and shirts did not add up. So the FBI decided to go after Colombo. In 1970, his son, Joe Jr., was arrested for melting down silver coins to extract precious metals. Colombo viewed this as a trumped-up charge designed to get at him. It was the final straw. Now, he hit upon a radical solution to the FBI sniffing around his affairs: civil rights. After all, this was a rich time for civil rights activism. Across America, street protest was flourishing. The African-American civil rights movement was changing the face of America and inspired many other minority groups into action.
We're going to walk together. We're going to stand together. We're going to sing together. We're going to stay together. We're going to moan together. We're going to groan together. And after a while, we'll say, freedom, freedom, freedom now!
So Colombo got on the bandwagon. From a campaign office here at 7th Avenue, the former hitman prepared to step fully out of the shadows and into the glare of publicity and politics.
We feel that the people have had it, and the Italian people in particular, in the United States, which number 38 million, have been losing its identity as time has been going on, more and more and more so.
He exploited the growing unrest in the Italian-American community of the time.
He claimed that Italians were being discriminated against. There was some truth in that. At that particular time, you found very few Italian names on Wall Street in law or banking firms. And a lot of Italian Americans were not involved in any kind of organized crime or any other kind of crime.
So, Colombo would stand up for the rights of ordinary Italian Americans. And he started in a way that nobody could have foreseen.
In effect, he declared war on the FBI. So he began picketing FBI headquarters, which was then on the Upper East Side.
It was a remarkable opening salvo, picketing the very heart of law enforcement in New York.
He thought, if I claim that they're discriminating against me, I can either make them back off or slow them down.
Day after day, a crowd of demonstrators harassed FBI agents coming and going and accused them of unduly targeting men like himself who were legitimate businessmen.
Why the FBI? Why is the FBI, in your mind, persecuting the Italians?
He used all his underlings, and we used to call them mooks, M-O-O-K-S, to stand out there and do the picketing for him.
Well, it's obvious by just what everybody could read in the paper. Every time you see something, you see that the FBI is labeling Italian people belonging to an organization which they refer to as the Mafia. As far as we're concerned as Italian people, there is no such thing. It's a word that's been invented by the law enforcement agencies, and we don't feel it's right.
The crowds grew, and media attention followed. Colombo reveled in it.
There's a conspiracy in this country against every Italian American. We've been saying this, we'll continue to say it, and it's only till it touches them. And who are they? Are they any better than you, I, or anybody else standing in this crowd? Litigation on them.
This unspoken challenging of authority was unheard of in Mafia circles. It was in marked contrast to his silence at the grand jury years before. Mafia men, used to speaking in hushed tones of the Cosa Nostra, were unsettled.
I've worked all my life, and if it isn't in a real...
Why declare war on law enforcement? You're going to have enough trouble with them as it is. Why make it personal?
The worry growing in the highest circles of the Mafia was law enforcement scrutiny would intensify because of Colombo's actions. But initially, for the FBI agents, it was a new, unsettling tactic. The tables had been turned.
I know a lot of them were very furious with him. There were some collisions there on the picket lines where they almost came to blows.
Now I'll go a little further. Many of the other minority groups are starting to feel this thing. And when they get through with us, they have to go on to the next body of people. And this is where the public should wake up, and this is where the public should start demanding some of these things be brought out to light. And why are they so frightened of an investigation? And why shouldn't there be an investigation on them?
In 1970, Colombo shifted his protest movement up a gear. He created the Italian-American Civil Rights League.
Everybody wanted to be attached to it. Everybody, including the politicians, radio commentators, actors, singers, everybody. And then people started to realize, hey, the Italians contributed a lot, and a lot they should be proud of.
The League, with Colombo at the helm, had huge success almost instantly, recruiting some 50,000 paid-up members to its cause.
Now you see nationality flags. Well, Joe Colombo started it. It was the Italian flag being placed on every Cadillac that was in Brooklyn, owned by an Italian, or a Lincoln owned by an Italian. Every car had an Italian flag on it. Everybody bought into it.
And Colombo's League achieved some notable early victories. They took their campaign to the highest echelons of corporate America. Major brands like General Motors and Alka-Seltzer were targeted. Their ad campaigns were considered demeaning to Italian Americans. The League got them withdrawn. They also got a board game based on the Mafia pulled from Macy's department store. Even Hollywood felt the wrath of the League. Producers of the Godfather movie started to have trouble filming in New York. Production was threatened by walkouts, obstructions, and delays. The League came to the rescue, offering to smooth the process if the producers agreed to remove all references to the Mafia or Cosa Nostra from the script. League captains then toured Italian-American neighborhoods to sell the idea of the film to skeptical residents. Finally, filming was allowed to continue uninterrupted on the landmark Godfather film. Colombo went further still. He even got the New York mayor, prosecutors, and FBI to stop referring to the term Mafia in its official documentation, as it was prejudicial. The city was listening to Joe Colombo, and the League was proving to be highly effective. In 1970, Colombo was ready for the League's showpiece. Its first Italian-American Unity Day rally, to be held in Columbus Circle in the heart of Manhattan. Under the glare of news cameras, 50,000 people attended. The city's traditionally bustling Little Italies were deserted. The other mob families reluctantly allowed Italian-American businesses to close for the day in solidarity.
There was so much press, and the streets were just mobbed with people that were so proud of being Italian, and everybody wanted to get up on the dais to be standing next to Joe Colombo when he spoke of national pride and fellowship.
My fellow Americans,
Colombo held the stage and attacked the law enforcement community. It was a triumph for the Godfather turned activist. In the wake of the rally, interview followed interview. He appeared on TV chat shows and in magazine articles.
I mean, he gave press conferences to all the major newspapers, the Daily News, the New York Mirror, the Post. I mean, every newspaper wanted to hear from him.
Publicly, he continued to describe the Mafia as a myth and promised to champion the rights of all minorities.
Is the Italian American Civil Rights League accomplishing the aims that were set for it?
Oh, definitely.
What has it done? How's it? It has helped, not me personally, but helped all people. It has helped people of all ethnic groups. It's helped children. It's helped elderly people. It's helped anyone that needs help. It's made people feel that there are no orphans, and anybody who would want help would only have to ask for it, and they would have it.
Up until now, Colombo's League had preserved an air of legality. However, under Colombo, this positive gloss was wearing thin. Because he was still a mobster, and the League was just another money-making opportunity.
American Civil Rights League was created by Joe Colombo to fight against discrimination. As far as that went, it wasn't a bad idea, but he was the wrong person to be doing something like that. He was the wrong person to be represented as a leader of the Italian-American community.
In fact, Colombo was hijacking a legitimate cause. The League proved to be a money spinner. It was netting him plenty of funds that he could appropriate.
Joe Colombo formed the Italian-American Civil Rights as a racket, as a scam to make money, period. And he used it for that purpose. He was shaking down store owners all over Italian neighborhoods, forcing them to put his sticker in a window. It was an Italian flag with a 1 on it, Italian-American Civil Rights League, and he actually was garnering receipts from that.
A very wise state senator here, who was an Italian-American, said, Colombo, don't be fooled by Colombo.
Colombo wasn't just breaking the law by skimming off a legitimate cause. He was creating jealousy and suspicion in the Mafia ranks and within his own family. His old mentor, Carlo Gambino, started to warn him.
And he was told by Carlo, stop this. We don't want it. And no ands, ifs, or buts was taken. If you continue, you're going to pay a price.
But Colombo was oblivious to any looming danger. He thought he was untouchable, on the crest of a wave, and a media darling. He wouldn't back down. 1971 was going to be his year.
Colombo was an egotist. He figured he was bigger and better than the unit that he was working with, which was the Mafia.
Then, there was more trouble. The FBI struck again. Angered by Colombo's actions through the Italian-American Civil Rights League, they issued subpoenas for various high-profile bosses. In December 1970, he was arrested, along with one of his men, Rocco Miraglia. When police searched their car, they found a briefcase stuffed full of incriminating documents detailing the various Colombo family rackets. But worse still, the names of other high-ranking mob men. Colombo was immediately called before a federal grand jury to explain himself. But then he did something utterly unforgivable. Rather than keeping his mouth like he had the last time he came before a grand jury, he adopted a different tactic and decided to talk his way out of it. He explained that the dollar amounts next to names were simply donations for his league. Carl, he explained, was none other than Carlo Gambino, reputed Mafia boss. The $30,000 next to his name was actually a donation to the league. That was a bad move. You don't implicate the boss of bosses before a grand jury, especially when you're telling a lie. The repercussions were immediate. That same year, the police department moved in on the Mafia and federal strike forces combed the city. Even Carlo Gambino paid the price. He was arrested in 1970. It was clear that it was Colombo's loose mouth that had got him into deep trouble. With his former protector and with the FBI.
His behavior began to worry bosses like Carlo Gambino.
This incensed the old mafioso. They didn't want that. They wanted silence. They wanted to stay in the shadows. And Joe was bringing them out.
Joe Colombo's days were now numbered. But despite the looming threat, Colombo planned to fight on with his tried and tested formula. He would roll out the League across America. He even booked Frank Sinatra for a fundraiser at Madison Square Gardens. Politicians joined the cause, including State Governor Nelson Rockefeller. And he planned another showcase rally as a platform for his ever-expanding league. This rally would seal his status as a civil rights activist and keep the forces of law and order off his back. But by now, his enemies inside the mob were stirring. An old adversary from his early days as family boss was waiting in the wings. Crazy Joe Gallo was watching events from prison with a critical eye.
Joey Gallo was called Crazy Joe. And there was a reason for that, because he did crazy things.
I'll give you an example of Joe Gallo's operation. They had a club on President Street in Brooklyn. And in the basement, they had a mountain lion that they used to intimidate victims, meaning gambling victims who owed them money or loan sharking victims. And if somebody didn't pay up, they'd just bring him to the club on President Street, open the door to the basement, and down at the bottom of the stairs would be this mountain lion, ready to, and they would do what they were told.
Colombo and Joe Gallo had formed. He and his brothers, Larry and Albert, known as the Gallo clan, had once tried to take over the Colombo family. In the 1960s, they led a bloody insurrection from their base here at President Street in Brooklyn, until Joe Colombo brokered a peace deal with Larry and Albert Gallo, while Crazy Joe was in jail. Now, Crazy Joe was itching to get back at old rival Colombo.
The bottom line is jealousy. Gallo wanted to be the boss of the family, Colombo was the boss of the family, and Gallo wanted to take him out. Simple as that.
Gallo needed soldiers for the forthcoming showdown. And he had a novel idea where to find them. Behind bars, he had made contacts and alliances with African-American gangsters from East Harlem. This was something no one in the Mafia had ever attempted. The two groups were traditionally enemies. But Gallo was ahead of his time. He saw that if the two groups worked together, they could be stronger. Then, in February 1971, Colombo's old enemy, Crazy Joe Gallo, was released after 9 years in prison. Publicly, he swore his Mafia days were over, and he renounced his criminal past. But privately, it was business as usual. He was back on the streets. In his eyes, the peace deal was null and void. As far as he was concerned, the war was never over, and he was preparing for a counterattack. So it was that the stage was set for the second Italian-American Unity Day rally, held in June 1971, at the same site as his triumph a year earlier, New York's Columbus Circle.
They had a huge rally which attracted thousands and thousands of Italian Americans. This was Colombo's rally to rally the Italian people against the FBI and New York City Police Department and law enforcement in general. Now, we were a distance away taking pictures and doing intelligence work, taking plate numbers and observing who was there.
However, something had changed. The Mafia bosses had instructed Italian Americans to stay at work. The League was no longer tolerated. 40,000 fewer people turned out.
Attendance was down then at the next Columbus Day rally. They passed the word that stores should not close and people should not attend.
Just before noon, Colombo headed to the podium to speak. He was preparing to launch another stinging attack on the FBI. An African-American news cameraman with press credentials approached. As the journalists grabbed Colombo's attention for a soundbite, the newsman moved forward.
I was there the day that happened, and lo and behold, up comes this gunman and shoots Colombo in the head. Down he goes.
Then something even more remarkable happened.
And the man that shot him was dead before he hit the floor. So there was actually 2 killings arranged that day. One to have Joe shot, and one to have the shooter killed.
Joe Colombo was immediately rushed to hospital, alive but comatose. Confusion reigned, and supporters were at a loss to explain what had happened.
You know, he was down on the ground and there was blood on his right cheek. And, it's incredible. You don't expect to see these things in the course of covering a story. And the shots kept coming, and, and I was standing like, 3 feet or less, and then I started to run. And I heard somebody else's shot, but I wasn't there. I ran.
As far as I know, Joe is in Roosevelt Hospital in critical condition with 2 shot wounds, one in the chest and one in the head. And I understand one of the perpetrators is dead. You know who did it? I have no idea. I have no idea who did it. Did you see it? No, I did not see it. I was standing behind the stand when it happened. What's your reaction to this? Our reaction is, right now, still a state of confusion as to what really transpired. I'm still trying to piece the information together myself.
The hit on Colombo had been carried out by Jerome Johnson, an African-American from Harlem, but he was a very unlikely killer. He was a drifter and petty criminal with a penchant for stalking girls on a nearby university campus. He had no record as a hitman for the mob. It was a curious discrepancy for New York's chief of detectives, Albert Seidman.
Unfortunately, we have not been able to rule out one possibility or the other. Mr. Johnson is still some sort of a mystery man to us.
What puzzled the police was someone must have told Johnson to undertake the hit and trained him. The question was, who? The African-American link to Harlem pointed to Crazy Joe Gallo.
More and more around town, you hear the gangland theory being pushed that Gallo did make a hit on Colombo.
This is merely conjecture and rumor, but there is no basis to any of it, as far as we have been able to learn thus far.
The simple truth was that other senior Mafia figures must have been at work. Because for over 50 years, no one could be killed without the approval of the Mafia's governing body, the Commission. Every family had a seat on the Commission.
If they had to kill somebody, they had to go to the Commission, and the Commission had to vote on it. This would prevent wide-scale killing and trying to take over different families.
Under its rules, no family head can be rubbed out without the agreement of the other Commission members. The idea was the head of each family had an equal say on how decisions were taken. It was democracy, Mafia style.
First place, you're supposed to have permission of all the other bosses to kill a boss. That's just simple. But bosses can't allow bosses to be killed without the permission of the other bosses. Otherwise, none of them are safe.
Many therefore concluded that Gambino had to be somewhere behind the hit and had sold it to the commission.
I don't think there was much crying in the Gambino camp or the Gallo camp when Joe Colombo was so seriously wounded.
But as so often with the Mafia, the Columbus Circle shootings and attempt on Colombo's life went unsolved. There was nothing to pin on Gambino.
We're saying that Johnson had some connections with the Gambino family, but we are not making a statement that that was his exclusive connection with organized crime.
The one man who might know the truth was Crazy Joe Gallo. 11 months later, Crazy Joe was eating with his friends at a seafood restaurant to celebrate his 47th birthday.
They were sitting at a rear table, this group of 6 people, when a man walked in from the back door, and he walked up to the side of the table, and he fired 3 shots. He hit Joe twice, and he hit his bodyguard, Pete the Greek, 1 time.
For the FBI and police investigators, the only explanation had to be Colombo family members out for revenge.
He was killed by elements of the Colombo family. It was ordered by a guy named Joseph Iacovelli, Joe Yack. He was he was the capo in the Colombo family who ordered the hit.
But if Colombo's shooting was supposed to bring stability back to the Mafia, it actually signaled the slow demise of the Colombo crime family. Because, leaderless and at war, the family's fortunes turned irrevocably downwards. It began to tear itself apart in the decades that followed. The internal power struggles never ended. The Colombo family is now just a shadow of its former self. In 2011, a further 125 of its members were arrested. The family's power has collapsed, for now. As for Joe Colombo, none of this mattered. He never recovered from that day at the rally. He remained in a vegetative state and died 8 years after being shot.
Funeral services were held today for one of America's leading crime figures, Joe Colombo.
If you look at his record, he was only arrested for shooting crap when he was 18 years old. Every other indictment, every other accusation came after he became a civil rights leader. And that was another indication on how the media, particularly, champion what law enforcement often gives them. Joe Colombo has left his mark in American society.
He died a maverick godfather, a former killer who had dared to do things differently. But by taking on Mafia rules and fighting the FBI at the same time, it was a battle he could never win.
His picketing the FBI building at police headquarters was kind of stupid. You know, you're not exactly dealing with the faculty at Harvard.
Perhaps his biggest mistake was to find the world of civil activism more intoxicating than running a crime family.
For a while, he got away with it. People who should have known better joined his committees. He was using civil rights as a shield. In my opinion, he was the fool.
Fame would offer Joe Colombo no protection from a failure to obey the most fundamental Mafia principles.
all Joe Colombo's troubles were brought on by himself. I mean, if he had followed the rules of the mob, particularly the mob bosses, and stay out of the limelight and just operate your business and bring money in, he never would have had a problem. But because he became flamboyant and he got his ego swelled, he decided to go out into the public world, which was a major error.
In any case, the high-profile civil rights league he founded virtually disappeared overnight.